Hello and welcome. Tonight's presentation was meant to be a live presentation, but unfortunately we did experience some technical difficulties, so we're going ahead and recording this, and any interested parties can then view it at their leisure. So welcome. My name is Kaylee Snoddy. I am from the Clinton River Watershed Council. Tonight's presentation, Your Home, Your Community, Your Watershed, is in partnership with Ray Township Public Library. They've been a really great partner, and they're just huge supporters of the Watershed Council and our mission. So thank you for hosting us, so to speak. So a little bit of an introduction to the Clinton River Watershed Council. 50 years ago, the Clinton River was in trouble. It really was not uncommon to see sites like this along its banks, rusted car chassis, things like refrigerators, old trailers being rolled into the river. It really was a dumping grounds back in the day. And as a matter of fact, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources did a fish survey from Pontiac all the way to the confluence of the main branch and north branch of the Clinton River and did not find a single living fish. So it's safe to say that things were looking pretty bleak for the Clinton River just a couple decades ago. This isn't ancient history. This is fairly recent, and it's incredibly recent in terms of, I mean, the scale of geological history, natural history, so on and so forth. So in 1972, the CRWC began as an association of local governments and wastewater treatment plants. Passage of the Clean Water Act that same year encouraged further participation. We really began to see this shifting narrative across the country, but especially in the Great Lakes region. We began to see more talks of invasive species and what their implications were. This real shift towards our natural resources being high value and water especially becoming a concern. In terms of if we've sullied the water, do we know that we can restore it? Do we know that we can make it better? And what does that look like? So 50 years ago, the CRWC was born. Our mission is to protect, enhance, and celebrate the Clinton River, its watershed, and Lake St. Clair. We are a nonprofit. We are supported by grants, be that federal, state, private foundations, as well as individual and community membership and donations. And to accomplish our mission, we focus on 3 program areas. We do education, public outreach, such as these presentations. We work with all ages, so adult presentations like this. We do workshops with students and children, all to accomplish our goal. Stewardship is this kind of value of taking care of the land responsibly and trying to sustain whatever land use, whatever resource use for generations to come. So stewardship for us looks like citizen science work. We do water quality monitoring in the spring and in the fall, and then we get to take that data and actually report it to the state as a way to monitor the water quality here. Stewardship also looks like cleanups and native plantings for us. Our cleanups, for example, we have several different events that occur each year. We have annual cleanups. We have cleanups that happen in the summertime where we paddle down the river and pull trash out. And then we also have our weekly clean program that goes from April to November. Every Wednesday, we visit a different park or public space and clean it up. And across our cleanup programs, we pull out over 10,000 pounds of trash each year from the Clinton River and its surrounding areas. So it's an ongoing battle for sure. Watershed management, this is our work with municipalities to go through these restoration projects to improve habitat quality, to address water quality concerns, as well as inform watershed usage, so the land that's adjacent to the water. Are they planning on developing it? Is it going to be something that they're looking to develop into a park or a green space that we can preserve those resources at? And what's best for the environment? We help to inform those decisions, and we really believe that you accomplish more when you have more people's buy-in and partnership on a project. So those are our 3 program areas. Getting into our watershed though, moving away from our organizational, logistical stuff. What is a watershed? What does that look like? A watershed is an area of land that drains into a common body of water. So you can see here the red is highlighting that topographical divide. Every raindrop that falls on the land within that red zone is running into that same river, that same body of water. So the Clinton River watershed, you can see it over here in this picture, southeastern Michigan, right, heading into Lake St. Clair. So here's a better look. The Clinton River watershed encompasses 5 counties, about 50% of Oakland, most of Macomb County, and then little slivers of Lapeer, St. Clair, and Wayne County. Communities that fall directly within our watershed boundaries. We have 63 of them. The watershed boundaries actually end right about here and right about here, but we also serve these communities in the direct drainage zone of Lake St. Clair, as well as some of them in St. Clair County, because they're draining into the lake and not into the Clinton River necessarily, is not a huge problem for us. These guys also contribute to Lake St. Clair, and that's an area of concern for us as well. So they don't have their watershed groups, so to speak, so we help to cover those areas. In total, that makes 75 communities that we reach out to for public education, for watershed management, all that good stuff. The Clinton River watershed encompasses 760 square miles and contains 1.5 million people, which makes us the most densely populated watershed in all of Michigan. The Clinton River, the main branch of the Clinton River, rather, runs 81.5 miles from the headwaters up in Springfield Township all the way down and out into Lake St. Clair, where it drains. So let's talk a little bit about water quality. So some of the historical water quality problems of the Clinton River watershed, I like to divide these into kind of 2 different categories. I find that they kind of fall under these 2 umbrellas. So the lack of policy and regulation prior to the Clean Water Act meant that there were things like industrial waste, contaminated sediments, and dumping occurring regularly into the surface waters of the United States. And so that means there are contaminants in the water. There is warm water being discharged from industry that's affecting the populations within the river. Those contaminated sediments persist because they sink to the bottom and they don't really go anywhere. As well as this sort of second group of issues, which is the rapid development of our area. The Clinton River watershed was developed so rapidly that we kind of saw this 0 to 100 wetland loss and shoreline hardening phenomenon. So wetlands function as a natural sponge, a natural filter. They serve a humongous and really difficult to quantify ecological value and ecological service to our planet. So the rapid loss of these wetlands all being filled in to provide infrastructure. I mean, people need homes to live in and businesses to work at and roads to get to and from those places, but that meant that we made the sacrifice of those wetlands very rapidly. And shorelines serve a similar purpose. They can sort of naturally prevent erosion from occurring on shorelines. If you have something like a hardened seawall, like in the picture here, when that seawall fails, it's going to be an enormous erosion event, versus if you have a natural shoreline that's sort of gradually sloping down to the water's edge, and it has things like trees and shrubs and natural grasses. Not only is that providing habitat for the things that live on those shorelines, but it's also preventing that rapid erosion. So some current water quality problems that we experience. Moving on from the history now to now. Fecal bacterial contamination is a problem. We see this with combined sewer overflows and septic failures. This is an aging infrastructure issue that, as we begin to update and continuously update our infrastructure, we see less and less of this, and these events, these combined sewer overflow events in particular, are closely monitored and actually reported on a yearly basis. So we know exactly when they happen and where they come from, and how much, and that's a very closely monitored water quality problem that hopefully one day we won't see anymore. Contaminated sediments, this is kind of a leftover from those historical problems. It's pretty difficult to rid of this problem other than scooping out those contaminated sediments and remediating the area, although that is happening. That is something, especially on the lower Clinton and parts of Lake St. Clair's shoreline, we're actually addressing that quite soon. There's going to be a lot of scooping out of those contaminated sediments in the near future here. Flooding, of course. I mean, I remember pretty vividly in 2014 when we experienced pretty severe flooding in the Clinton River watershed area. This is due to a lot of impervious surfaces. That water doesn't have anywhere to go. That's the long and short of it. And this is only going to be continuously worsened by the effects of climate change. We're going to see more extreme weather and droughts in between, which, believe it or not, contributes to the flooding problem further because that soil then can't saturate like it used to, but I digress. Increased temperatures, so we've kind of created a bit of a heat island in some of the places of our watershed. If you've ever walked outside on asphalt or concrete in the summer, you'll know where this is going. The earth has become so warm in these areas that have a lot of really dark impervious surfaces that then bleeds out deeper and out into the rivers and streams and lakes, which creates issues for the wildlife, that the water isn't holding as much oxygen, or they physiologically aren't adapted to warmer waters. So that creates problems. Chemicals is kind of self-explanatory. You don't want to see anything in the water that doesn't belong. But the single greatest source of pollution for our watershed is stormwater pollution. So let's get a little bit into that. So what is stormwater pollution? When it rains on impervious surfaces, stormwater flows across, picking up its pollutants, and pollutants are then carried by the stormwater into our drainage systems and eventually into our waterways, if it doesn't run directly into a waterway. Now, these storm drains that you see, I know when I was little, I thought that these were carried to some kind of treatment plant before it reached any other destination, if it went to a drinking water treatment plant or if it went directly into lakes, rivers, and streams. This is not the case. It goes directly into our waterways with no treatment. They do not pass go and collect $200 to get cleaned. These things go directly into lakes, rivers, and streams, and with them, they carry a lot of these stormwater pollutants that we see every day. Fertilizers, this is coming from golf courses, this is coming from people's backyards. Sediments, we have a little clip art here of a construction crane. There are management practices that construction projects are required to follow to keep those sediments from flowing into the river, but sometimes those measures fail, or sometimes the people who are putting those measures in place aren't properly educated, or they just might not know how to properly implement those procedures. Oil, gas, and detergents, these are common things that we see in areas with lots of cars, lots of transportation. The detergent, of course, if you're not making the connection, is from car washes. Pet waste, this is also including natural wastes. However, if you've spent any time around geese, you can understand why they might fall into a category with these pets. Agricultural runoff, so anything that isn't being contained to those fields where it's being applied. This is something like manure. This is something like this is also a problem in places where cover crop is not utilized, where you've tilled your field and now all those sediments are going to run off with the water the next time it blows through because there's no vegetation to hold it in. This can also be coming from the livestock on farms. And lastly, litter. Well, not lastly, we're going to delve a little deeper into these pollutants here in a second, but litter is pretty self-explanatory. We've all seen it. We all know what it is. So fertilizers create a problem due to the overgrowth of algae, sometimes harmful to human health. Excess algae also deprives systems of oxygen upon decomposition. So what this means, fertilizers contain excess phosphates and nitrates, which help plants to grow. They are limiting nutrients typically in a system, so adding those means that the plants could grow without limits. When it enters our waterways, that leads to the algae taking advantage of those nutrients, and like I said, it depletes the water of oxygen when it starts to die and decompose. Pet waste and agricultural runoff, this is more excess nutrient input as well as bacterial contamination. So something that we test for is fecal coliform bacteria. That's something that comes from feces. And that bacteria can be harmful, and it can be harmful in a number of ways. Ingesting, sometimes I mean, I've heard horror stories of people splashing stuff in their eyes and getting eye infections. But it's also not beneficial to the ecosystem and the things that live in and around the river, of course. Detergents, this is primarily a phosphorus input, and this also encourages that growth of algae. Sediments, this creates a problem for two different reasons. First being that nutrients, heavy metals, and other contaminants bind to those soil particles. So those are carried out into the river along with those sediments. And the second problem is that excess sediment can block sunlight, which limits the photosynthesis of aquatic plants. And it also isn't great for the animals living in the water. If you can imagine swimming around in the river as a fish and everything's cloudy, you can actually do damage to gills with all that extra sedimentation. Oil and gas, petroleum and chemical additives are harmful to aquatic life, and they can sometimes be difficult to get back out. Another anecdote from growing up that I remember is the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico was like a really huge case study in how difficult it is to remove petroleum from waterways. And then litter, plastic waste never goes away. It breaks down into microplastics. And we're going to delve a little bit further into microplastics here. So where do they come from? These microplastics can be intentionally produced for industrial and cosmetic purposes. Some people might remember they made cleansers at one point that had little plastic microbeads that were supposed to exfoliate your skin. Those don't break down and they just enter the water, and sometimes our drinking water facilities, the people who receive the wastewater from our showers, from our sinks, from our washing machines like we see here, they don't have a very good way to filter out some of the lightweight particles. Secondary microplastics are unintentionally created by the breakdown of larger pieces of plastic debris. Things getting battered around by the wind or battered around in the water will then release those tinier microplastics as they break down. They never really break down all the way, they just become smaller. Other sources, they can be shed from textiles. So when you wash polyester clothes in the washing machine, you're releasing tiny little fibers into the water. And like I said, that then creates a problem for the water treatment facilities that are trying to remove it, et cetera, et cetera. They also come from vehicle tires and brake pads. One of the biggest, in terms of accounting for weight of the garbage that we pull from the river, one of the biggest sources of our litter is tires. There are lots and lots of tires in the Clinton River, and it's a huge concern for us because of those chemical additives to vehicle tires, but that they also break down into these microplastics. So microplastics are smaller than 5 millimeters. They are found in bottled water, as well as tap water. Like I said, those water treatment facilities have a difficult time removing them. Approximately 1.2 million tons of microplastics are generated annually. So they end up in our food, water, and the air we breathe, and end up in our bodies. And microplastics in the Great Lakes specifically are an enormous concern because plastic debris makes up about 80% of the litter on the Great Lakes shorelines, and about 22 million pounds of plastic enter the Great Lakes each year. This is a huge concern because these things never break down, and they actually break down further into nanoplastics, which then are an even more concerning issue because they have been found to diffuse through membranes in our cells. So we are now finding these nanoplastics in between our cell walls. I read an article not too recently, I think it was several months ago, that microplastics were being found in babies that were being born. Like these plastics are so prevalent and widespread in our environment that if we can't stop them from entering the environment, we can't help that they're breaking down further and creating a larger problem. So moving away from those plastics, the doom and the gloom, we're going to take a deeper dive into stormwater here. So wastewater, the water you use in your home from your toilets, sinks, showers, dishwashers, from your laundry rooms, those discharge into a sanitary sewer system, which gets taken to a wastewater treatment plant before it is used again. Stormwater, however, goes through the storm sewer system, which in most communities is a separate sewer drainage system. And this water directly enters streams, rivers, and ponds, as I said before, completely untreated, so it carries those pollutants and debris to our waterways. Contrast that with a combined sewer system. So combined sewer system, that's up the top here, the top row on the left and the right. Those systems are older pieces of infrastructure, so they're less widespread. I know we typically see them on the south side of the watershed, places like Royal Oak, Ferndale, those places that were urbanized a little bit earlier in our history. The more runoff that you have in a combined sewer overflow system, the more likely you are to have a sewer overflow because of that backup. So as you can see in the picture here, let me pull up my laser pointer. This is how it goes on a normal day. You've got your downspout. That's all going to go straight to the sewage treatment plant because it's kind of flowing backwards away from the drainage itself. When you have a storm event, that storm drain is going directly into that combined system, which means that that sewage as well as that stormwater are going to overflow from that backwards running pipe and going to skip the water treatment plant and outfall directly into a water body. Like I said, this is highly monitored, so we know every time that there's a combined sewer overflow in a community, and that's reported out each year. But this is something that affects public health, it affects the recreation of the river, and it affects the overall community value. If you're living in a place where this is happening semi-regularly, that's going to affect your quality of life, and it's going to affect the market value of your property, and it's a problem. So the Npdes and Ms4 permits, these are under that Clean Water Act through the EPA. These help to regulate and hold standards to municipalities that have any kind of discharge into surface waters. That includes these combined sewer overflows as well as regular storm sewer systems because they discharge into those surface waters. And through those permits, there's monitoring taking place, there's pollution prevention taking place, as well as public education programs such as these. A lot of our public education is actually directly related to these permits so that municipalities can fulfill their requirements. So it's really important for people to be informed about the communities that they live in and what goes on in and around them. So let's think about rainfall on natural surfaces. We're talking about delving a little deeper into stormwater. Why is stormwater such a huge problem? It carries these pollutants, but why is there such an enormous quantity of this stormwater flowing through in the first place? Natural surfaces make good use of this rainwater and snowmelt. A mature tree can absorb over 4,000 gallons of stormwater each year, and as water percolates through the soil, groundwater is naturally recharged. Those groundwater aquifers become recharged as the water seeps in. The Clinton River watershed has more than 1.5 million people, which requires a lot of impervious surfaces to support the transportation and industry that we see here. Our roads, homes, and businesses unfortunately don't leave much room for natural surfaces in a lot of our communities. So these impervious surfaces speed up the process of that water reaching its rivers, lakes, and streams that it's going to end up at. Large inputs of water in a short time period can cause flooding and erosion. So we see here that the quantity of stormwater ending up in our rivers, lakes, and streams, as well as the quality of it, the pollutants it's carrying, can degrade water quality as well as aquatic habitat. So what are some measures that improve stormwater quality and quantity? The long and short of it is green infrastructure. This is something that is kind of this emerging solution to these stormwater problems that a lot of communities are doing their best to incorporate and switch to, instead of that gray infrastructure, these impervious paved surfaces. Green infrastructure mimics natural systems to capture, soak up, filter, and store that stormwater. And it aims to reduce stormwater surges as well as the amount of pollutants entering local waterways. So here's some examples of our green infrastructure. On the right here we see a green roof. So that's replacing the impervious surface on the roof of a building with some of these natural native plants is what we want to get at here. So some of these natural shrubs, grasses that are going to absorb that extra water. Rain barrels, rain gardens, these are both ways to slow down that water. Rain barrels, in one case, it allows you to use that rainwater to maybe water your garden, water your lawn. And a rain garden is slowing down and actually soaking up that extra water as it falls. The top left there is a permeable pavement. So instead of having just a sidewalk, you have a sidewalk with little patches of these pervious surfaces, so that when it rains, maybe 50, maybe 60, maybe 70% of that water isn't going to be sitting on that concrete. It's instead going to absorb. An urban tree canopy, this helps to improve the water quality and quantity problem by soaking up that water. It's also creating a space for the water to fall on leaves, for it then to evaporate off of those leaves, and instead of falling and flooding an area, it's going to then transpirate out into the atmosphere. Bioswales and planter boxes are a similar concept to rain gardens, a little bit different in their execution. Bioswales are a little bit wetter. They kind of hold on to that water a little bit more. And planter boxes, like in the picture here, are redirecting a flow from an impervious surface into a place that can absorb that water. Plants, trees, grasses, anything green that you can incorporate is going to help to increase the permeability of that surface and therefore allow that water to seep into the ground instead of running off into storm drains or pooling elsewhere. Native plants and trees play a significant role in green stormwater infrastructure. As I said earlier, water can move across the land as runoff, while some water infiltrates the soil, percolating downward and moving horizontally to a nearby water source. Pretty intuitive concept. But where native plants come in handy in this process is that they have incredibly deep-reaching roots, so they can absorb excess nutrients and contaminants from the soil before they reach a water source, as well as help to break up that soil so that it can percolate deeper and move more quickly vertically through the soil layers there. So this is a gentleman standing next to a native prairie plant. As you can see, the plant's roots are taller than him. And then this next graphic is one of my favorites. This is illustrating the root systems of several native prairie plants to the Midwest. So on the far left, you can see that sort of little shrimpy guy on the far left there. That's our Kentucky bluegrass. Its roots, the reason we can roll it up into sod is because its roots are not far-reaching at all, in comparison to some of these prairie plants that are reaching upwards of 15 feet down into the ground. So they have access to a lot of soil to absorb those nutrients and those excess pollutants and break them down, as well as helping the soil to percolate further down because it's kind of broken up and aerated the soil naturally. So native plants are capable of phytoremediation. This is where contaminants are taken up from the soil and sequestered in leaves or stabilized within the roots. This is accomplished by the microorganisms that live in the rhizosphere. The rhizosphere, in this next picture here, is just referring to the kind of soil environment that's surrounding the leaves there. So the root exudes things like organic acids, small molecules, and hormones, and this helps to break down these contaminants. So plants can deal with them in a number of ways once they uptake those contaminants in the roots, or once those contaminants are reaching the hormones and chemicals in and around those roots. Phyto degradation is where it is taken into the leaves and broken down. Phytovolatilization is when it is taken into the leaves and then kind of in a transformative way, it is then kind of exhaled from the plant. It becomes a volatile. It becomes something that moves into the atmosphere. Phytoextraction is the plant kind of sequestering that chemical into a part of itself, and then depending on the plant, it might drop that leaf, it might kill off that section so that those contaminants are out of the soil and out of the form where it's harmful and sort of trapped it into its body, so to speak. Phytostabilization and phytostimulation both take place directly in that rhizosphere environment. Stabilization is that transformation to a different, more stable chemical compound that's not going to it sort of becomes inert in the environment and doesn't have the same sort of health hazards, so to speak, to animals, to plants, to the microscopic organisms that are living in the soil. And phytostimulation is similar to that degradation. It's breaking down, essentially. So just really briefly to talk some more about plants doing the hard work of removing contaminants. Our cottonwoods and our willows are the most common trees used for phytoremediation of organic and inorganic contaminants. And then on the bottom right there, we have our purple coneflower. They have the ability to reduce petroleum hydrocarbons. And in this particular experiment, by almost half, just after 30 days in their pots when exposed to that petroleum. As well as in another study on the plant material from year 1 to year 2, when they analyzed it, they found that those contaminants were being sequestered in that plant material, and that's how it was being reduced from the soil. It was being sequestered into those plants there. So a Michigan study at a former steel mill with contaminated soil found that some plants native to Michigan promoted growth of microbial species capable of degrading PAHs. PAH stands for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and they're a class of chemicals that occur in coal, oil, gasoline, those same hydrocarbons we were referring to before. And it was found that PAH contamination in the vegetative plots was effectively remediated compared to the non-vegetated plots. So these native species, what do we have up here? Things like our common boneset, our English aster, New England aster rather, and our purple blue stem were taking out those contaminants in a measurable way. As I said before, these deep growing roots penetrate up to 15 feet into the soil, so they're also very effective erosion control. So this is a photo of a stream bank restoration with native plants that we helped to plant in Depot Park in Clarkston. On the left there, you can see that sort of failing bank, spaces where there's bare soil and patches of grass that are kind of falling in, versus on the upper right here where we have all this gorgeous greenery growing in and holding in those banks. So what can you do to help protect water quality? The good news is we can all help to protect water quality, but let's get into it a little bit. The responsibility of keeping our waterways clean does not fall on one entity or individual. There are 1.5 million people in our watershed, as I said, and thousands of storm drains. So that's a lot of people, and that's a lot of power that we hold across those people. Committing to small actions in your everyday life can make a huge difference over time if we all contributed. So doing things like keeping wipes out of our water treatment facilities. These things hold on to things like fats, oils, and greases and create things like fatbergs. If you want to look at something horrifying, you can Google fatberg. This is something that develops in our sewers when wipes are flushed down the toilet. By not flushing wipes, you create an environment for wastewater treatment facilities to very easily clean the water. You can use a laundry bag, or I've even seen these balls that you throw into your laundry to capture those fibers as they are shed from synthetic fabrics. What I would recommend is also trying your best to avoid synthetic fabrics. I didn't know that things like polyester were made of plastic until semi-recently, and now I make an effort to buy cotton, wool, natural fiber clothing that I know isn't going to be creating this persistent microplastic. Wash your car at a car wash or on the grass to prevent that detergent from ending up in our waterways. Keeping your lawn tools and cars in good working order so gas and oil aren't leaking. Being sure to check for leaks for one as well. Plant native plants. Not only does it create habitat for our native fauna, it also boosts our pollinator populations. It helps to remove those contaminants. It helps erosion. I mean, really, native plants are like the superheroes of our environment. Trying to lessen the impact of the impervious surfaces at your home, or trying to rid yourself of impervious surfaces. This might be something like pervious pavers. Instead of just bricking a walkway, maybe you opt to have some stepping stones here and there. Or, like I said, diverting things away from those impervious surfaces. If you have a driveway that's slanted and it can kind of slant over, maybe you plant a rain garden over there. Maybe you attach a rain barrel to your roof so that you're taking that runoff off of that impervious surface and using it for other things. These are just small steps that you can take at home that if everybody took one of these things off this list, we would make an enormous impact. And you probably already do some of them, if not most. So rain gardens, just getting a little bit more in depth about these rain gardens because people are really interested in them these days, but I won't harp on them too much. There are tons of resources online, and we are, as always, a resource for you as well. Feel free to contact us with any questions or any assistance that you'd want in creating a rain garden on your property. But this is kind of a bowl-shaped area that collects stormwater runoff, and then it is specifically planted with coarse or porous soil mixtures beneath a bed of native plants to help that soil take up that excess water. This is a more detailed function slide. Like I said, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but it intercepts and filters that stormwater by settling it out and allowing filtration into that deeper soil layer. Those native plants are hard at work destroying those contaminants in the soil, and they also take up those excess nutrients like phosphate and nitrate that we see from the fertilizer, we see from the pet waste, we see from so on and so forth. And these rain gardens help to slowly recharge our groundwater aquifers. So what is CRWC doing to protect water quality? Well, I'll be brief, but some of our programs include stream leaders that I had mentioned before, and we're actually going to be at the Ray Township Public Library doing a stream leaders on the 29th. So if you're interested, be sure to check that out. This is water quality monitoring program for schools, although we have branched out into homeschool groups as well as public events such as the one that we're going to be doing up here soon with the library. We also have online resources on our website so that you can check out the program even if you don't attend. But this is starting the next generation into caring about water quality and understanding what water quality means and what those parameters are. I was in stream leaders when I was a kid, so it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I think is truly meaningful to these students. We do public education, as I said, things like these presentations and workshops. We also produce newsletters. We keep our website up to date, as well as the Clinton River Quest guidebook. If you're interested in exploring the Clinton River watershed up close and personal even further, you should check out our Clinton River Quest. We have 50 activities, I guess you could call them, to do all across the watershed to really acquaint yourself with it and learn a lot more. It's a pretty detailed document, so highly recommend checking that out, as well as river outings we do from time to time. Our stewardship, as I mentioned, we had 60 cleanup events over the last year with over 7,000 pounds of trash removed in 2021. We're still working on calculating the numbers for 2022, so we're slated to surpass that by a long shot, due to kind of the world recovering and being able to get out and do cleanups again. And with our Adopt a Stream program, we have had our citizen scientists monitor 38 sites as of last year. We kind of, that number fluctuates a little bit based on the volunteer base, but it's our largest program, Adopt a Stream. It has about 250 volunteers consistently each year. And if you're interested, we're actually doing our trainings right now. So if you head to our website or to our Facebook, we have the flyer posted there as well. You can sign up for a training and get involved with the program. Our watershed management, doing things like stream bank restorations, planting native gardens, planting rain gardens in addition, river access planning, as well as assistance to local governments and landowners, as well as restoration project monitoring. So if you're interested, definitely get in touch if you want to hear more about anything that I've mentioned today, but just a couple things that you can do to get involved with us and protect your water is to educate your friends, families, and coworkers about what you learned today. Read up some more about native landscaping and green infrastructure, and plant some plants wherever you can. You can opt to become a citizen scientist. Like I said, if anybody's interested in Adopt a Stream, we're doing those trainings right now. The next monitoring is going to be on October 1st. It's always the first Saturday of May and October. You can volunteer at a CRWC cleanup. Weekly clean happens every Wednesday, like I said, and our Clinton cleanup is going to be taking place on September 17th this year. That's a watershed-wide cleanup. We're going to have a guide posted on our website that you can check out. They happen in all different locations. And I think that anybody who's watching this presentation should also look into becoming River Safe Lake Safe. River Safe Lake Safe is a survey that we have. It's a number of questions evaluating your lifestyle and the things that you do at home to protect water quality. And if you check off everything on the list, we give you a neat little plaque like the one pictured, and you can display to everybody that you are River Safe Lake Safe. And as always, remember, the Clinton River watershed is your home, your community, and your watershed. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, you want to learn more about any topic that I covered today, you can contact me. My email is here, kaylee@crwc.org. And our office's phone number is 248-601-0606. We are open to the public. Our normal hours are 9 to 4 p.m. We're located over in Rochester Hills. But as I said, get in touch for anything. We'd love to be a resource for folks. And every single staff person is super passionate about this mission. So yeah, thank you so much. Be sure to check us out and continue to support the Ray Township Public Library because they are excellent supporters of our mission, and they've been really great partners for us. So thank you so much.